A song can be banned for any number of reasons. It could be something small as mentioning a brand or being about a taboo subject. The Beatles are not an exception to this rule, and there have been songs that have been banned for a variety of reasons. The BBC, also known as the British Broadcasting Corporation, is one of the biggest broadcasters in the world, and it's also been around for about 100 years. They have banned and censored songs for a multitude of artists over the years, and the Beatles aren't an exception. Here are some of the following songs that have been banned by the BBC. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. John Lennon has claimed numerous times that this song is not about LSD. The coincidence that you can spell out LSD with the name of the song is just that, a coincidence. And just because it's a psychedelic song with trippy lyrics doesn't mean much. The song was inspired by a drawing that Julian Lennon made. And the exact drawing wasn't seen for some time, but decades later, after the song came out, and it would be found, it got auctioned off, and it was purchased by David Gilmour of all people. At the end of the day, however, this was a bit too much for the BBC. The song seemingly being about a drug trip, and its title spelling out LSD, had too much relation to drugs for them, and they ended up banning it. Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite. This song was inspired by the circus poster you see on the screen now. It's meant to be a whimsical circus song, and it's rather straightforward. As always, songs were picked through for the subtlest of details, and the line, "Henry the Horse," caused a lot of concern. This was seen as a reference to heroin, due to these two words being used as a slang for the drug. However, this was denied by John. Once again though, songs related to drugs were a big no-no at the time, and this slight reference was a big concern, even though it wasn't really intended to be, at least so it's claimed. A Day in the Life. The third and final Sgt. Pepper song was banned. This time, it is the closing track on the album. There are a few lines that were written that were rather questionable. As you can see on screen, these were the two big lines that they had a big concern with. These were seen as promoting drug usage, and subsequently, A Day in the Life was banned from airing. There weren't any issues with lines like "he blew his mind out in a car," but sadly, the interpretation of the song that it was about drug use was too much, and it wasn't allowed on the BBC at the time. And once again, they banned a song. I Am the Walrus. John Lennon always has a good sense of humor. After receiving a letter from a student mentioning how their literature class was analyzing Beatles songs, John decided to write the song. The thought of over-analyzing their writing was rather silly to John, so he liked to poke fun at it sometimes. I Am the Walrus is lyrically a pretty random song. The BBC had no issue with the mentioning of dead dogs, guns, or anything of the sort. The issues came with these lines. These simple words are way too explicit. You can't have that on the radio. It's way too over-sexualized for the time. So, there goes the song. Back in the U.S.S.R. This is the only time that a song was banned years after its release. When the song came out in 1968 on the White Album as its first track, nobody really cared, even though it was about the U.S.S.R. It didn't cause a whole lot of concern besides in America, because some people thought the Beatles might be pro-Soviet. In 1990 though, the song came back into discussion of being controversial. This was at the start of the Gulf War, and the song got banned by the BBC as well with many other artists getting their songs banned. This was due to the heightened tensions at the time, and anything seen as related to the war was taken off the airwaves. Come Together. The final song that was banned by the BBC is the opening track to Abbey Road. Now, think about Come Together. What is bad about this song? There isn't really any kind of innuendos, and it doesn't seem like it can even be controversial. But there's one single line that caused issues. It's not an offensive line, but the mentioning of Coca-Cola made the song unplayable in the BBC's eyes. At the time, mentioning brands in a song was also a big no-no. The Beatles weren't the only ones who got in trouble for mentioning a brand. This was all it took for Come Together to be banned. You know, now that I think about it, all these songs that were banned by the BBC are pretty much all John's songs. And, you know, he might be a little controversial. Outside of the realm of the BBC, the Beatles have had their music banned for other reasons. One of the most notable instances is because of the comments made by John Lennon that implied the band was bigger than Jesus. The quote was taken out of context, and radio stations in the United States ran with it. This caused some people to take issue with the band and saw them as being against religion. There were a few radio stations around the US that ended up banning the band's music for the time, but this was overturned eventually. Due to the controversy in America, other countries got wind of what was going on, and the Vatican even denounced the band at the time. And there were even some instances of some stations in Europe and Africa that ended up banning their music as well due to these comments. This is just one of the more notable instances of songs being taken off the air. The band has had songs later in their solo career that caused some issue, but that's another discussion. There is actually one song that caused some issue for the band more than once. A Day in the Life. In the archives of Royal Albert Hall, a letter was found that was written to the band in 1967. At the time, some people who worked at the venue got an early copy of the album, and they gave it a listen. The lines that you see on screen were a big concern to them. They wrote the following letter to Brian Epstein, the band's manager, with their concerns. Fearing that the lyrics would give Royal Albert Hall a bad image, they wanted the lyrics to be changed, and gave some possible changes that the band could make to ensure that there would be no issue. John actually responded to this letter. This rather blunt response ended up leading to a ban on all Beatles-related music at the Royal Albert Hall. And this isn't real. The Royal Albert Hall put out this information on, you guessed it, April 1st. It's kind of rather convincing, but ultimately it's really fake. And since the day that I'm uploading this is April Fool's, I thought it'd be fun to include. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.